Empire. I have with me today my man Harvey Graham. What's up, Harv?
Good to see you again.
How you doing, brother?
I'm doing well.
Awesome. So I had the good fortune vis-a-vis Chris Krohn's foundation to spend some days with Harvey in the Ukraine. So Harv, how to if we go back to last August, I guess it may have started last June or July, but if we could talk about August when the government was shutting down Afghanistan, that's when the next phase of your life happened, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely. So I still have a day job. I kind of do have a second life, but essentially working about 16, 18 hours a day. But yes, what happened in July?
Did you get a phone call like, hey, come over here kind of thing?
I got a phone call from a few friends, actually. But notably, once the Taliban hit Lashkar was a provincial capital of Helmand province.
Which is Afghanistan.
Which is in Afghanistan. It's a straight shot up the highway from Pakistan. The Taliban had kind of massed. They'd managed to kind of cross up the highway, essentially, and get to Lashkar. And then there was a battle where the Afghan security forces fought against the Taliban for a couple of days.
Did they fight brilliantly, or would they kind of not put the fight that was thought was going to happen?
It depends on the unit.
Got it.
Like with the Afghan army, it always depended on the unit who was going to fight and who wasn't going to fight. A lot of that came down to leadership again. We'd have, back in when I was there, certain Toles would fight very hard, even because they had good commanders, and certain Toles were drunk and not drunk. They were taking drugs and that kind of stuff because they had no leadership. So it was really a leadership thing. Lashkar was seen to kind of have better units of the Afghan army protecting it. There was something called a ring of steel around Lashkar that we built and the Afghans had taken over from us, the Afghan security forces. Lashkar fell in about 48 hours, if I remember correctly.
And that was faster than you would have thought? Or was that expected?
That was faster.
Got it. Okay.
So I chatted to a few people, but I chatted to one of my interpreters who'd been a good friend of mine. And I said, like, what's going on? Like, why is this falling so quick? And he told me that there was going to be a coup in the government. The Pashtun members of parliament were going to go across to the Taliban, and the other members of parliament were essentially just fleeing.
So does that mean the people knew this was happening and they didn't want to be executed later on?
Yeah.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, it means like if you imagine you're a colonel in charge of an Afghan army Kandak, you've got about 500-600 troops, depending on the size of your Kandak, but probably around 500-600. And then you will have like a local minister who you will talk to, a local politician in your area that you will talk to because you have to have the link to the government, right? And then you also have a general that you report to, or brigade commander, which will be a general. And then if you imagine one day you call them up and they're packing their bags, right? Or they're just not answering the phone.
Got it.
And that's what happened in the Afghan army very early on.
Got it. So July, you get a call, you're learning some things, and this is July of 2021.
Yeah.
And what happens?
Well, what happened there was there was a lot of us kind of chatting, and we were like, what's going to happen? Like, we always trained something called ANSOF, the Afghan National Army kind of special forces units. And the idea was that ANSOF would hold no matter what. So there was actually planning for routes in the Afghan security forces. Like, it was assumed that if a major conflict broke out, that some elements of the Afghan army would route, but the Afghan special forces would never route. That's what they were trained. They were trained to hold, and the president would have them, and he'd have a ring of steel. He'd have, I think, around 20,000 of them, and he could just fight wherever he needed to fight. And they were well trained, well equipped, as good as any of our soldiers. Well, mostly. What then happened was we got to a situation, if you remember, the Taliban were parked outside of Kabul.
Yep.
They were on the highway.
This is on the news.
Afghan special forces were like in a ring of steel around Kabul. This was like late July, very, very early August. And then behind the scenes, what was happening was the airport had been cordoned off by the president.
So it wasn't seized yet.
It wasn't seized. It had been cordoned off by the president, and people were fleeing.
Got it.
And the U.S. Embassy was closing its doors very quickly, but quietly.
Yep.
And, friends of mine who had U.S. citizens in country were saying, like, hey, like, we need to get them out. How can we get them out? The embassy's shut. The airport's surrounded by troops. What are we going to do? So through like the network of friends that I had, some of which I met in Team Rubicon, some of which were Marines who'd served in areas of Afghanistan that I was close with, some of which were veterans back in the UK. We very quickly phoned people that we'd served with who were Afghans that were still in Afghanistan. And then we started looking at options, how we'd get some of these immediate family members of friends of ours, US citizens, out of the country. And that very quickly came to kind of an idea of, okay, we're going to need to get money in there. And we're going to need to get people who can get through Taliban checkpoints one way or another. Ideally, we don't want to be putting together teams of people fighting. Like, that's just going to add to the violence in a war zone. You don't want to add to the violence unless you have to. You want to bring things down. Yep. So we need to get people who will be able to have like diplomatic protections, what we'd call it here, but over there it would be like tribal protections, right? We need to get people to areas that the Taliban may not be able to take. So we started contacting our networks in Afghanistan, kind of putting them together, organizing them into teams, collecting lists of US citizens and Afghans that would be definitely executed by the Taliban if they were captured. And then we started like looking at logistical lines into Pakistan, Uzbekistan, and up into the Panjshir Valley.
So this created the Allied Extract 501c. That's yours.
Yeah,
right?
So we didn't start off as a 501. We started off as mine and my co-founders' credit cards and our savings. We just pulled it and we were like we're going to get them out. It was our interpreters. If it wasn't for our interpreters, you wouldn't have any savings because we'd probably be dead. Yeah. So it wasn't a hard call. It was a bit harder for my wife because we just bought a house and didn't have much money. But it wasn't a hard call. It was like, listen, like this is something that's going to define us. Like, I'm going to remember in 20 years that I left my interpreter's mum to die in Kabul, right? So like, I don't care what it costs. Like, let's just start getting money in the country. Let's start paying the right people. Let's get some taxis together. Let's get some coaches together. Let's get some fuel organized, put into depots before that shuts down and nobody can get any fuel, right? And let's like get a plan together to get these people out.
Yeah. So folks, when you deal in the space of certainty and under no uncertain terms, burn the boats, meaning you're going to do something with absoluteness in your intentionality, things begin to happen that are pretty incredible. And, what Harvey and his crew did next was, next to miraculous. And when you think about the folks that you actually helped at that particular point, we could go 30, 60 years in the future and somewhere in that mix, because of who and who was saved and, their children's children, because they're still alive, can be someone that actually makes the world a better place at some point. You never know how this plays out.
I see, like, you see a lot of the politicians, right? And because of my background, that's some of my least favorite people, but some of them are really good people and they helped us a lot in Afghanistan. So credit where credit is due, right? Sure. But you see politicians and they're on the circuit and they're talking about kind of what they're doing and what they've done. And they tell you about like their grandparents' immigrant story, right? Like there one day will be someone in this country, I'm pretty convinced of this, that will run for president. Yeah. And like their grandparents got pulled out by just a group of crazy veterans and some taxi driver who managed to throw them over a wall.
And how many people did you guys actually save as they shut down Afghanistan?
In combination with the people inside the base and a couple of government agencies, we got out 418. And then last month we got an additional flight out, which brings us over 587. But
if we go back to the 418, was that realistically in the month of August and September of last year?
August, September.
Yeah. So folks, check it out. So if you go back, go to the news, go last summer in August, go look at the news where they showed the big airplane taking off and the person falling off the plane, and all the people that were local folks in Afghanistan wanted to leave with us, with that plane. Actually, as people were trying to get to the plane, they were murdered. Harvey and his crew, Allied Extract, were able to save 428 people through their corridors, through their systems, through their ecosystem mergers, through their communication. No different than business. If you want to accelerate your business, and now I'm going to create these analogies, it's the mastermind that you're with. It's the proximity you have to other people that think like you. And as a result, when you have two thoughts of like-minded individual, it creates a greater thought. And through that system and process, you have what Harvey did. And by the way, the story, it certainly doesn't end there. I believe it was the birth of something special as a result of that. And if we could kind of talk about that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so kind of the network that we built in Afghanistan, we created a process that was essentially repeatable. We had capacity constraints, right? But it was a repeatable process. It was a successful process. That got out very quickly, and we were asked to get certain people for...
Was there resistance from power players, though? Or if you... I don't know what you can and can't, so I don't want to... If you can, it's all good,
Yeah, so it was funny because you can watch the news at the time, right? There's a split in government. So the Pentagon's trying to achieve one thing.
Yep.
And the State Department's trying to achieve a different thing.
Absolutely.
And we would be in a place where we'd be asked by people in government or with certain government agencies to go and get people and take them to certain contacts that we had through a direct gate into Kabul for high value targets or VVIPs, whatever you'd want to call it. So we would go and get someone on request of a federal agency to pick them up and then bring them to the airport where they get taken in via a secret gate and then get onto not one of the generic flights, like onto a special flight that would fly them out direct to the US. And we would trade a couple of seats in exchange and put our interpreters on there and get them out that way. So we're working very much in lieu with the government. But then on the other side, you've got the State Department trying to shut everything down. You've got the administration telling US soldiers they can't leave the base. We were calling British soldiers from the parachute regiment, right, who were running buses out and just picking people up. They're running local buses. You just tell them where you lived. If you're a British citizen, the bus would turn up outside your house, you get in. The Americans weren't allowed to do that. So like we had kind of the bridging there as well. So yeah, it's super complicated. There were a lot of people who were like actively trying to stop things. Mostly the State Department.
Amazing. Sad and amazing. So October, November, December, you're back here, I'm assuming.
Yeah. I'm here. I'm getting on with my day job, right?
Was there whispers in December about what was happening in the Ukraine? Was any of that a surprise to you? What was that like going
Ukraine
on?
Was interesting, right? Because like we spent a lot of October and November doing expenses because our 501c3 status got approved, and doing all the normal stuff you do at a small business, right? So like, where's my folder full of PDFs and invoices showing where we've spent all the money, right? Like I want that all, dot the I's, cross the T's, etc. And then you saw like the massive forces across the Ukrainian border. And then you had, to be fair, our current administration, British administration, plenty of European administrations saying he's going to invade. And everyone was like, no, he's not. Like, we don't believe a word that you're saying. Yeah. You've lied to us. Like, look what you did in Afghanistan.
Absolutely.
Like, nobody believes anything you're saying. And from my own kind of personal understanding of that part of Europe was like, he would be insane to invade because they hate him. Like, Putin is not a popular man outside of some regions in eastern Ukraine. Like, let's be clear here. Like, there's parts of Ukraine where there are majority Russian speakers and they want to rejoin Russia.
Got it.
Like, we have to understand that. But we also have to understand that that is not true for 3/4 of that country.
Got it.
So
did I see any of those parts when I was there?
You're close enough.
Okay,
you're close enough. Yep. But it's a very complicated place. Like, you'll have hamlets of Russian speakers as well within these areas. So it's, very, very complicated. But nobody believed he'd actually do it. And that became like a big issue. So then what happened was the invasion was launched. And then my co-founder, not me, he was like, we got to do something. So he was working with our current executive director. And they started sending volunteers with certain skill sets in that would be able to like give technical assistance to the Ukrainian government to help them. And then also evacuations. But as we saw like very quickly in Ukraine, like those who needed to get out in the early days of the war got out pretty quick. Yeah. And actually our executive director, Lydia, was evacuating family members, extended family members.
And Lydia was one of the members that was with myself and the rest of the team that went over to the Ukraine. And she, I always said, was the emotional barometer for all of us that didn't understand all the dynamics in the different towns. Yeah. And just, leaning on her when you would just see her as we advanced further and further from Poland, to Lviv, to Kyiv, to Bucha. And her emotion was felt and pretty incredible. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for checking in. And Harvey, one last time, brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming.